Hi friends, my name is Katie. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. Today I'm here to talk to you about what I read in January. And friends, it was such a good reading month, both quality and quantity, because I read 7 books total, 2 on audiobook, the rest were physical copies. That may not sound like a lot to some people, but for me, at this time in my life, that is a feat, my friends. And I don't know who I am anymore because 2 of those books, like I said, were audiobooks, and I have never been able to listen to audiobooks. I listened to 2. One of them, both were good, but one of them was amazing. And I kind of want to talk about that one in conjunction with this one, No Exit by Taylor Adams, which is a thriller about this young woman who's in college and she is on her way home to visit her dying mother, and she gets trapped in the mountains with a few other people at a rest stop, and she finds a young child who is caged in the back of a van. And so she knows that one of the people at the rest stop is to blame for this abduction, and she's trying to figure out who it is. It is definitely thrilling, but I think I have reached my limit in terms of what I can handle in a thriller. I didn't like this book at all, and this is super hyped. Like, people love this book. I think I gave it 2 stars on Goodreads. It was thrilling. It kept me on the edge of my seat. It did the things that you want thrillers to do. Like, I wanted to keep turning the pages. I wanted to know what was going to happen, but it was way too gruesome for my taste. There were a couple moments in this book where it made me physically sick to my stomach, and I could not handle it. It has been so long since I've found a thriller that I enjoyed that was anything more than like a 3-star read. Thrillers are just really hard for me to love. Now, I get the appeal, and I like a good thriller every once in a while, but I just struggle to find ones that really hit home with me and become favorites. And maybe that's common. Maybe people don't read thrillers to become favorites, but I'm always in search of my next favorite book, and so when I'm reading a book that I know isn't going to become a favorite, it doesn't make me want to pick up more books like it. Do you know what I mean? So I didn't love this book. It was just too much for me. Also, by the way, all of these books behind me, I have this pile of books that have been in my last couple videos, and I know it's ridiculous. These are all my unread middle grade books because I'm getting ready for middle grade March and I'm so excited, and so these are just sitting on my bookcase to keep my excitement and enthusiasm and inspiration for middle grade March. I didn't review every book that I read this month, so some of my thoughts might be a little jumbled because I'm also someone that needs to think before I talk, and so if I get on in front of the camera, sometimes I get a little flustered and I'm not as articulate as I want to be, but it is what it is. I need to get this video filmed, so we're gonna do it. After I read No Exit, I was like, I don't think that I'm ever going to find a 5-star thriller. Well, how wrong was I? Because I listened to Long Bright River this month, which is a new book out in January, and it was excellent. Technically, it's a thriller, but honestly, I would not go into that book thinking that it's a thriller because it's a lot quieter, it's more slowly paced. Not that it was ever boring, it was never ever boring. It was compulsive reading. I wanted to be reading this book. I thought about it when I wasn't reading it or listening to it, but it didn't have the same feeling as a thriller. I would classify it more as police procedural, mystery, even a little bit family drama, and also literary fiction. But don't let the literary fiction scare you off because it was so readable and the audiobook was excellent. So Long Bright River is about a young woman, a police officer who lives in Philadelphia. She is assigned to the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia, which has been overrun by opiates. There is an opioid crisis, and that is true. One of the things that I loved about this book is that I went down rabbit trails online, learning as much as I could about the opioid crisis in Philadelphia, and I found some really interesting articles that I will try to remember to link below. There was one in the New York Times. Oh, there were a couple. Some of them were like photojournalism articles. Some of them were just articles about what's happening and what the city has tried to do and failed to do to keep this in check, because drug addiction is so hard. It's just so hard, and the homelessness that comes along with it, and how do you fix something like that? It's very complex, and you get that as well reading the book. So the book itself is about this woman, like I said. She's a police officer. She's assigned to the Kensington neighborhood in Philadelphia, and she's trying to find her sister, who is both a drug addict and a prostitute, which is something that happens to many of the young women who are addicted to drugs. So her sister has gone missing, as well as a string of murders of young women that seem to be all connected. The police, especially her direct supervisor, don't seem to be taking very seriously these murders. So she takes it upon herself to both go looking for her sister and to try and figure out these murders. The book starts out kind of slowly, and you get a lot of background about Mickey is the name of our protagonist, and her sister Casey. You kind of have a lot of flashbacks. The book is so tremendously heartbreaking and gripping and poignant and gritty, and by the end of the book, you're just racing towards the end. And while I would say that it's not your standard thriller, I will say that there are plenty of twists and turns, and it is a fantastic mystery. I think I enthusiastically gave this book 5 stars partly because I had just decided that I wasn't a thriller reader, that I like them occasionally, but I'm never going to find a 5-star thriller, and then this book plopped into my lap and I loved it. But I think what I loved about it was that there was so much more to it than the thrill. There was the complex family dynamics between the two sisters, there was the deep dive into looking at the opioid crisis, and then there's also the pain and the overwhelm of being surrounded by addicts in one's life. And then you, of course, have this satisfying, propulsive mystery kind of woven throughout the book. And it's just amazing. You know, was it truly a 5-star read for me? I guess we're going to have to wait and see toward the end of the year when I'm looking at my favorites. But I left the book very affected. So, for right now, it's a 5-star read. What was absolutely a 5-star read for me was Us Against You by Fredrik Backman. This is the follow-up to Beartown, which was on my favorites list from 2019. This book, oh my gosh. You cannot read Us Against You without reading Beartown first, because the events of Us Against You take place immediately following the ending of that book. So I'm very hesitant to say anything about Us Against You, other than this town is in disarray and it's divided down the center, and it swirls around the hockey competition between Beartown hockey and head hockey. It's about this bitter competition and the seams of this town that have been ripped apart because of the events that transpired in the first book. That's the synopsis that I'm going to give you. While these books deal heavily with hockey, if you're not a hockey fan, which I'm not, I couldn't care a hoot about hockey, although my husband loves hockey, even though he never watches it. He says he loves hockey. Who knows? Even if you're not a hockey fan, don't let that deter you from reading these books. Going into this book, I wasn't worried that I wasn't going to like it, but I wasn't sure I was going to like it as much as I liked Beartown, and I was worried that this book wouldn't live up to Beartown in my estimation, but oh my gosh, did it ever. It was incredible. I have never found an author that makes me feel the depth of emotions that I feel as Fredrik Backman. He understands the human experience in a way that is so profoundly true. And I love him for that. He creates these characters that are so real, and he puts these very real characters into situations that are so complex. His characters are despicable and lovable, and often they are both of those things at the same time. I don't know how he is able to create characters like this that are so true to what it means to be human, because aren't we all both despicable and lovable? We make decisions in our life that are terrible, and yet we're not wholly awful. I know it sounds like a cliche to say this, but while I read this book, there were times when I laughed, there were times that I cried, there were times that I got so angry, and there were times that I felt uplifted. It's an incredible reading experience because I had this full range of emotions, and really any author that makes me feel that full range of emotions is gonna get 5 stars from me, because I am fully invested in what's happening and in the lives of these people who have become real, and sometimes I feel like they're my friends, that I know them and love them. even if they're not always good. There's often times when reading this book where you think you have a character pegged. You think that you know them, and then your expectations are completely flipped on their head. And I think that's the point that Bachman is trying to make so often, that assumptions don't do us any favors, and that we are all good and bad, and that even when someone looks like they are completely unlovable or evil, or at least very morally ambiguous, there's often good in that person. I'm not explaining this very well. Read Frederick Bachman. That's what I'm trying to say. The other audiobook that I read was called The Age of Miracles by Karen Thompson Walker. She wrote The Dreamers, which came out last year, which I own but haven't read yet, but would like to. Like I said, I listened to this one on audiobook. It is a post-apocalyptic novel, but even more than a post-apocalyptic novel, I would say that this is a coming-of-age story on the backdrop of the apocalypse. So we follow a young girl, a teenager, I think she's probably 13, I'm struggling to remember her name right now, in this world that she is coming of age in. The rotation of the earth has started to slow, and the days are getting longer and longer and longer. There's this sort of tension in the book between people who want to adjust to this new time and people who want to stick with 24 hours because the days are longer than 24 hours now. So that's what's happening on a broad scale, but then it's really just about this young girl who continues to go to school and continues to have drama with first love and continues to deal with bullies and changing friendships and parental crisis, which is all being affected by the apocalypse, but they are all sort of normal coming-of-age situations that she's finding herself in. It's much more quiet and contemplative than I was kind of expecting going into the book. I wanted going into the book for it to be a little bit more focused on the apocalypse, but it was still good and I enjoyed it. I think I gave it a 3-star rating on Goodreads because I liked it. I also, this month, reread Little Women in this beautiful Puffin and Bloom edition, which I love, but it's huge. I don't remember Little Women being quite so long. This edition of it is almost 780 pages. Like, this is almost an 800-page behemoth. But because it's a children's book, it reads much more quickly, and even though it's a classic, it's very readable. I have read this book 3 or 4 times in my life. This was probably my favorite reading experience of Little Women. And it could just be that there's a lot of hype surrounding this story right now with the movie adaptation, which is amazing and I loved it. I'm not sure that it replaced my love for the 1994 Winona Ryder version, but I did love the new Little Women, and I loved this reading experience of the book the most. The first time I read this when I was probably 11 or 12, I was bored to tears. I thought it was the most boring thing I'd ever read. And then I read it again 6 years ago. When I read it 6 years ago, I liked it. I liked it a lot. I think I gave it 4 stars. I found it a little too moralizing when I read it then, which is very indicative of the time in which it was written. But reading it this time, that's not how I felt. I loved the dynamics between the sisters and their mother. Yeah, it was wonderful. If you don't know what Little Women is about, it's about 4 sisters growing up during the Civil War, their wonderful relationship with their mother named Marmee. Their father is off fighting the war, so he's not really a central character anytime in the book, even when he comes back. It's about their friendship with this neighbor named Teddy, and the main character, the titular character, I'm not sure you would call her the titular character since she's not necessarily titled in the book, is Jo. I mean, you feel probably the most connection with Jo, I think because Louisa May Alcott based these characters off of her own family and her own sisters, and she herself was kind of Jo. The first half of the book follows these sisters when they're young, and the second half of the book follows these sisters when they're a little bit older. A lot of people feel like this book is saccharine, but I feel like there is enough heartache in this book that leaves you feeling like it's bittersweet more than anything. I don't want to give away a 150-year spoiler, but I won't say why that is if you're unfamiliar with the story of Little Women. This was a great reading experience, definitely my favorite, and I didn't feel the moralizing quite as much as I did 6 years ago. Another 5-star read from me in January was The War I Finally Won. This is also a follow-up to a favorite book that I read from 2019. That book was The War That Saved My Life. This book is The War I Finally Won, and this book also takes place immediately following the events from that book. The premise of the first book is that there's this young girl who lived in London with her abusive mother and her younger brother. During the bombing raids on London, she escapes with her brother. One of the things that happened in World War II is that the children in London were sent to outlying cities and towns throughout the rest of England. So Ada, our main character, is able to escape from her abusive mother. It's kind of a story of found family, this woman that she goes to live with who wasn't looking to take in children but ends up taking in Ada and her brother, and has a story of her own. They find each other and in many ways save each other, and this book, like I said, follows the events of that book. I loved it equally as much. It is beautifully written. The characters are wonderful. The story is heartbreaking and hopeful. Once again, the story is filled with so much bittersweetness. You don't leave The War That Saved My Life thinking that it needs a companion, but when you read this book, you realize that maybe you really did want some resolution for some of the things that are talked about and explored in the first book, and I love this series so much. This is middle grade fiction that can be read by any age. And then finally I read These Happy Golden Years by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I've been rereading the Laura Ingalls Wilder books for like 2 years now, and I just want to finish this series. Not that I haven't enjoyed the books. I've loved them. I've loved rereading them. I'll probably reread them again with my kids at some point. In fact, I will definitely be reading these with my kids because there's enough content that is, I hate saying the word problematic, but there's just no other word for it. There's enough problematic elements in these books that I want to be able to discuss them with my kids, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be read. I'm a huge proponent of the fact that even in books where there are problematic elements, that doesn't mean that you should toss the baby out with the bathwater. Yes, these books are written about the pioneering experience, about a pioneer family, and so they have some very outdated views in terms of lots of things that as modern readers we are able to see and we are able to say that's not right, but that doesn't take away the value of these books in other respects. I don't know if that makes sense, and I have thoughts about that I haven't completely clarified in terms of how to talk about them. That being said, this was probably my favorite book from the series. I loved the sweet romance between Almanzo and Laura. I loved watching Laura become a teacher. I love her independent spirit, and I just thought that this book was delightful. I really loved it, and I have one more book to read, and it's like 120 pages, and I've actually started it. So those were all the books that I read in February, my friends. Oh, one of the things that I really wanted to talk about, because I've been listening to audiobooks and loving audiobooks so much, I am part of the Libro FM listening squad, which doesn't mean anything other than I have a link for you if you're curious about Libro FM to follow, and you can sign up and get 3 audiobooks for the price of 1. Libro FM is an audiobook subscription service, a lot like Audible, except that you are supporting a local bookstore. When you sign up for the service, you put in the local bookstore that you'd like to support, and so your audiobook purchase will go to supporting that local bookstore. It's pretty amazing, and you can support local, which I love. So if you're curious to know more, check it out in the description box below. Anyway, I hope you guys had a great reading month. I hope you had a great January. I'm ready for February. I have an ambitious reading month ahead of me, and I need to go start reading right now in order to read all the things I want to be reading. So don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this video, and I'll talk to you all later. Bye!